She was supposed to become a billionaire's wife, but half an hour before the wedding, a phone call shattered her world. Left alone, without a home or support, Samantha found the strength to move on. But she had no idea she was carrying 4 children. Years later, fate once again confronts her with a man who once left her at the altar. Now he wants to reclaim what he's lost, not only her, but the sons he never knew. And with him comes danger in the form of his fiancée, willing to do anything to make sure Samantha loses everything. Who will win this battle? A mother standing up for the right to her children, or the power of money and power? Stay tuned if you want to know how this story ends. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss the most interesting things. In front of the full-length mirror stood Samantha Blake. Her bridal gown glistened in the sweet's gentle amber light. For what felt like the 100th time, she adjusted the lace veil, growing more hesitant with each movement. Aside from the steady ticking of the wall clock, the room was silent. 11:30 a.m. In half an hour, the ceremony was set to begin. Her heart pounded with a mix of love, nerves, and excitement. Today, she would become Mrs. Jonathan Carter, the wife of Boston's richest man. The phone rang, just as everything seemed perfect. With a lingering smile on her lips, Samantha turned to pick it up, her heart skipping a beat. "Hi there." Her voice was soft and shaky. A thick, prolonged silence followed. "Samantha." Jonathan's tone was distant and icy. "I won't be attending." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her heart thundered painfully as the air left her lungs. "What?" she murmured, disbelief coloring her single word. "It's over. I can't go through with it," he replied. "Right now, I need to focus on my business. You'll understand eventually." The line went dead. Samantha stared blankly at her reflection in the mirror as the phone slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. A bride with no groom. A love story without a happy ending. As the minutes passed, Samantha realized this was more than just a broken romance. It was the beginning of a conflict she never saw coming. That day, her world crumbled, leaving her in a haze of shock and sorrow. Surrounded by the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of her life, the luxurious hotel room, once a symbol of Jonathan's wealth and prestige, felt cold and lonely. She tore off her veil and tossed it aside, her vision blurred by unshed tears. Jonathan had shattered every promise symbolized by the exquisite lace, now crumpled on the floor. News of the wedding's cancellation went viral in the days that followed. Headlines portrayed Samantha as the fiancée left to pick up the pieces after Jonathan Carter made his last-minute decision. As she left the penthouse they'd once shared, paparazzi chased her, capturing every moment of her anguish. But Samantha refused to give up. She packed her belongings and disappeared from the high society world she'd once been a part of, with no job, no connections, and nowhere to go. She rented a small, run-down apartment outside the city. Though it lacked Jonathan's shadow, it starkly contrasted the luxury she'd grown accustomed to. One morning, about a month after the tragic non-wedding, she sat in her modest bathroom, staring down at a small plastic stick. As a second line slowly appeared, her hands trembled, expecting a child. The initial shock gradually shifted to something else, a mix of hope, confusion, and panic. She couldn't reach out to Jonathan, and after what he'd done, she wouldn't. Reflecting on how easily he'd walked away, she resolved never to let him back into her life. He had no right to know. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, her small body grew more vibrant. It turned out she was carrying quadruplets. When the doctor shared the news, she found it hard to believe. His tone carried a hint of wonder. "How will I manage this?" she whispered one night, sitting in the dimly lit room of her small apartment, cradling her stomach. But she did. Samantha thrived for them, not just survived. Working 2 jobs, a freelance graphic designer in the evenings and at a small marketing agency by day, she supported herself and her children, Jack, James, Jake, and Jesse, for small miracles that brought joy and love into her life. Samantha's determination grew alongside the quadruplets. With every milestone, every first word, laugh, and step, her conviction deepened. They would never have Jonathan in their lives. He wasn't worthy. The boys inherited Jonathan's sandy golden hair and piercing blue eyes. Strangers on the street would stop her, remarking on their striking resemblance. Each time, Samantha's heart ached a little, as though Jonathan lingered in every grin and sly look. By the time the boys turned 3, Samantha had established a routine. After putting the boys to bed, she squeezed in work as a freelance graphic designer, complementing her day job at the marketing agency. Despite limited funds, she made it work. There was no other option. But everything changed on a bright afternoon when Samantha took the boys to the park. Their laughter filled the air as they played on the swings. Samantha turned, her breath catching in her throat as a sudden awareness prickled the back of her neck. Jonathan stood a little distance away, watching her boys with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The two of them seemed to be the only people in the world. He looked sharper, older. His clothing was immaculate, though despite his well-groomed appearance, there was a raw, vulnerable look in his eyes. With hesitation, he stepped closer and whispered, "Sam Sapson." "No," she said, her voice trembling. Instinctively, she moved in front of the quadruplets, using her body to shield them. Jonathan's face paled as he took in the sight of the 4 boys. "Are they?" Samantha watched as the revelation struck him, but he couldn't finish the question. For a moment, he looked like a man who'd lost all sense of himself, his mouth hanging slightly open. "You don't have them," Samantha said. The words spilled out before she could stop them, but Jonathan wasn't fooled. His eyes betrayed him, darting between her and the boys, examining every detail. He moved closer, clenching his hands at his sides. "I need to know, Samantha," he pleaded, his tone urgent and low. "Do they belong to me?" Struggling to keep her expression neutral, she raised her chin. "Jonathan, it doesn't matter. You made your decision years ago. You're not necessary to us." Then, her voice bright but unsteady, she called out to the boys. "Guys, hurry up. Time to head home." They rushed to her, their tiny hands reaching up for hers. As they left, Jonathan stood motionless, watching them. When Samantha glanced back over her shoulder, she noticed a glimmer of resolve in his eyes. He wouldn't let them go. 2 weeks later, Jonathan returned, and this time, he wasn't alone. He had a lawyer with him. As Samantha read the papers he thrust into her hands, her heart sank. "Holding custody? You can't be serious." She looked up at him incredulously. "I am," he said softly. "I did something wrong, Samantha. I see that now. Those boys have a right to know who their father is. I should be given the chance to be part of their lives." She crushed the papers in her trembling hands. "After everything you've done since leaving us, you don't get to re-enter my life." He shot back, his voice cracking. "I never knew," she yelled. "You never gave me a chance to tell you about them, Jonathan. So you never knew." The words poured out before she could stop them. "Jonathan, you left. I had nothing when you walked out on me. For children to raise alone, no money, no home." His face stiffened, but he flinched. "I'm not going anywhere else." The months that followed were a haze of lawyers and courtrooms. As promised, Jonathan didn't back down. He fought to prove he was committed to being involved in the boys' lives, attending every hearing and meeting. And, painfully, slowly, Samantha began to believe him. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt quickly. Samantha couldn't help but wonder if he was truly there for the boys, or if this was just another power play as their tension grew. One evening, as Samantha was about to relax, a tall, graceful woman emerged from Jonathan's car, her possessive grip on his arm unsettling. Samantha recognized Vivian, Jonathan's fiancée, and her blood ran cold. But why was she here? Gazing down at Samantha's kids with a smile, as though they were already part of her ideal future. "Samantha!" "Hello?" Vivian purred. "I hear we need to talk about a few things." Vivian's cold smile settled on her, and Samantha's heart raced. Dressed in a high-end coat, with her hair perfectly styled, she exuded the same confidence that had always intimidated Samantha. It felt like stepping into a bad dream. When Jonathan had abandoned her in that hotel room years ago, she thought she'd escaped him forever. "Why are you here?" Samantha asked quietly, careful not to be overheard by the boys playing a few feet away. Vivian tilted her head with an amused expression. Isn't that obvious? She glanced at Jonathan, her face softening as she clutched his arm. Samantha, we're going to be a family. Samantha felt sick to her stomach. What are you talking about? Vivian declared, as though stating a normal fact. We're getting married. Additionally, Jonathan and I want to ensure that these young people attend our events. There was a lingering implication in her words. Samantha retorted sharply. Our family and our lives are not yours. Her barely contained anger made her voice tremble. You're not allowed to do this. Well, Vivian said lightly, we do. Her pleasant tone belied her words. Their father is Jonathan, and I'll be fine because I'm his wife. I suppose I might be referred to as their stepmother. Samantha sensed that everything was tilting. How is this possible? Vivian was here, further twisting the knife, and she had assumed Jonathan's return would be her greatest obstacle. Samantha, trying to maintain her composure, spat. You're not their mother. Their mother will never be you. Vivian grinned broadly. No, I guess not. But whether you like it or not, I will always be a part of their life. Jonathan, who had been quiet up to this point, moved forward. He stared at Samantha. Samantha, we want to make this work for the boys. For the boys. She felt a surge of rage at the casual assurance of his remarks. In order to provide the best life possible for her children, she had been struggling for the past 3 years. Now, pretending he could just take over, Jonathan was attempting to waltz back in with his fiancée. She screamed, her eyes burning. You can't just decide to play house with my sons when you return. Jonathan gently corrected her. Our sons, he said, and I'm not leaving. Samantha hated how her heart constricted when she looked into his eyes. He used to give her the same look when they were younger, making promises she had naively accepted. Samantha, he whispered, please, let's discuss this. I want to be a part of their lives. She inhaled deeply, forcing herself to remain composed. She said in a quiet but forceful voice, you can be in their lives, but on my terms, not yours. A glimmer of rage darkened Vivian's eyes as her grin faltered. You don't have to decide that. Samantha never took her eyes off Jonathan's. Indeed, Samantha replied coolly, since I am the one who has been here. I've raised them. When they're afraid or ill, they call me Mommy. Vivian started to respond, but Jonathan silenced her by placing a hand on her arm. His gaze was troubled as he turned back to Samantha. All I want is a chance, he muttered. Please. Samantha took a deep breath. Something softer, something aching, clashed with the rage inside her. She had no faith in him, not yet. But the boys had a right to know their father. There was a tiny, delicate part of her that secretly hoped he had changed. Finally, in a tense voice, she answered, I'll give it some thought. However, she added, after what you've done, you're not entitled to make demands. Jonathan's face lit up with relief as he gently nodded. Thank you. But Vivian appeared enraged. Jonathan, you can't be serious. She wants to be in charge of everything. With his eyes flashing, he said sharply, That's enough, Vivian. Samantha and I are the only ones involved. Vivian's face contorted with rage as Samantha watched, but she pivoted on her heel and strode back toward the car without saying anything more. Jonathan paused, his eyes still fixed on Samantha. I meant what I said. I want to treat them well. Then he turned and went after Vivian, leaving Samantha standing alone once more. That night, Samantha had trouble falling asleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Vivian's smug face, triumphant as if she had already won. She knew it wasn't just about the boys. It was about power and control. Samantha refused to let Vivian undermine her or remind her whom Jonathan truly belonged to. She called her lawyer the next morning. They discussed every option and choice in a long, acrimonious conversation. By the time they hung up, Samantha was exhausted but more determined than ever. No matter what, she would fight for her boys. 2 weeks later, the initial custody hearing was scheduled. Samantha's heart was racing when she arrived early at the courthouse. Jonathan was already there, his expression firm yet strained, and there was Vivian standing next to him like a shadow. The hearing was tough. Vivian's attorney portrayed Samantha as an inadequate mother, bringing up all her hardships and mistakes. They discussed her meager income, small apartment, and lack of family support. Miss Blake is obviously not giving these children the life they are entitled to, the attorney drawled contemptuously. However, Mr. Carter can provide the children with a loving environment, stability, and security. Samantha's fists clenched beneath the table. Dare they? They had no right to criticize her for working her hardest and making sacrifices Jonathan had never even considered. Then her attorney rose, speaking in a steady, calm tone. For the past 3 years, Miss Blake has been raising these boys alone. She has been their sole source of love, support, and care. She has never once sought assistance from Mr. Carter, despite her circumstances. The boys are content, healthy, and deeply loved because she has done everything in her power to provide for them. Jonathan shifted uneasily and looked down at the table. As she watched him, Samantha's heart ached, torn between wanting him to feel the same pain she had endured and wishing for him to understand. After hearing both sides, the judge, a severe-looking woman in her 50s, leaned forward and fixed her penetrating gaze. "Miss Blake," she began in a controlled voice, "while I believe you're an excellent mother, I also think that, if it's in their best interests, children should know both of their parents. Would you be open to collaborating with Mr. Carter to establish a shared custody plan?" With a sharp gulp, Samantha's gaze shifted to Jonathan. He had an open, almost beseeching expression. He seemed different, more like the Jonathan she had known in the past than the icy, aloof man who had abandoned her. She nodded slowly. "Your Honor, indeed." Jonathan let out a sigh of relief. Samantha allowed herself a brief flicker of hope. This might work. At the very least, they might manage to co-parent. However, Vivian blocked her path by stepping in front of her as she turned to leave. Her eyes blazed with fury as she snarled, "You're making a mistake. Samantha," she seethed, "you will be destroyed by me. Mark my words." Samantha gazed at her, her initial disbelief gradually replaced by a simmering hatred. "You could try," she whispered, "but I will not let you take my boys." Samantha was certain the real battle was only just beginning as she walked away. The weeks that followed were filled with uncertainty, stress, and bewilderment. The boys, too young to grasp the intricacies of the custody agreement, only understood that they suddenly had a father, a stranger who looked just like them. Jonathan made an effort, Samantha had to admit. Every weekend, he picked them up and took them to amusement parks, sporting events, and the zoo. He tried to learn about their favorite things: Jack's interest in puzzles and numbers, Jake's passion for sketching, and Jesse's obsession with soccer. Despite his efforts, the boys could sense a lingering undertone of uneasiness and stiffness in his interactions. And a small part of Samantha still felt the searing sting of betrayal each time she saw him attempt to connect. One evening, as he dropped the boys off, he told her, "I'm their father." His tone was firm but gentle. "They deserve to get to know me." "I understand," Samantha said, her arms folded protectively across her chest. "But Jonathan, they don't understand. You can't just walk into their lives and expect them to embrace you right away." His face tensed. "Samantha, what do you want me to do? I'm trying my best." She glanced at the boys seated on the floor, totally absorbed in building a block tower, and said, "Be patient. And please, keep Vivian out of it. They're confused enough with her involved." Jonathan's expression hardened. "My fiancée is Vivian. Whether you like it or not, she will be part of their lives." Samantha struggled to keep her composure as his words cut deeply. "Jonathan," she added softly, "you're going to have to decide between doing what's best for our sons and making your fiancée happy." A flicker of remorse crossed his eyes as he looked at her. Then he shook his head and turned away. "I'm not making a choice," he whispered. "I'll figure it out." But Samantha knew better. Vivian was a ticking time bomb, one that would eventually explode. It happened on a rainy Friday night. In a hurry, Samantha prepared the boys for Jonathan's weekend visit. As the children pulled on their jackets, their tiny rain boots scattered across the floor, a knock came at the door. Samantha opened it to find Vivian standing there, an umbrella over her head, wearing a pristine white trench coat. "Where's Jonathan?" Samantha asked cautiously. "He's not coming," Vivian said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "He asked me to come get the boys today." Samantha tensed, glancing quickly at her sons, who had frozen when they saw Vivian. Jesse stepped back, clinging to Jack's arm, while Jake withdrew behind Samantha's knee, staring at Vivian with wide eyes. "No," Samantha stated firmly. "You will not take them." Vivian narrowed her eyes. "Samantha, I'm not asking for your permission." Samantha blocked her way, squaring her shoulders. "Leave my house. Do you really think you can permanently erase me from their lives?" Enraged, Vivian spat. "They'll be my family. Their stepmother will be me. They'll become part of my household." "They won't," Samantha shot back. "Because they're my family," Vivian hissed, "and I won't let you manipulate Jonathan into thinking otherwise. Do you honestly believe that by using these children, you can make him forget about us? Or me? I'm marrying Jonathan. I'll make sure you never receive another dime of his money when we're done." Samantha was stunned into silence by the accusation. She had never made a financial request. She had never borrowed money from Jonathan, not while she was pregnant, and certainly not after the birth of their sons. The idea of using her children as leverage infuriated her. "Money isn't the issue here." Samantha struggled to maintain a steady voice as she ground out her words. "Staying away from the boys is the best course of action in this situation." A chilly smile curved Vivian's lips. "Don't you understand? You won't win. Jonathan will come to realize that I am the only one who genuinely cares about his future and ours." Samantha muttered. "And when he does, he'll take those boys away from you over my dead body." Vivian grinned broadly. "We can make arrangements for that." Before Samantha could react, she heard a cry from behind her. She turned to see Jesse's tiny face crumpling as he stared up at Vivian. "Get out," he shouted in a high-pitched voice. "You're cruel. You don't appeal to me." He was already sprinting toward his brothers when Samantha reached out. Tears filled his eyes. Vivian's smile vanished, and her eyes narrowed into slits. Samantha stepped between her and the boys and shouted, "You go." The tension was heavy and crackling as they stood there for a moment. Vivian tossed her hair, pivoted on her heel, and slammed the door behind her as she left. Samantha's breath came out shakily, her heart pounding. The boys shuddered against her as she bent over and gathered them into her arms. "It's all right," she whispered, stroking their hair. "Mommy's here. Mommy's got you." But as she sat there holding her sons, one horrifying thought kept coming back to her. Samantha wasn't certain she could protect her boys from whatever was about to happen, and Vivian wasn't going to stop. When Jonathan entered his apartment that evening, he immediately sensed that something was off. The air was tense, and the lights were out. Vivian sat on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand, her expression cold. "What's going on?" he asked, shrugging off his coat. "Where were you?" "I had a meeting," he said slowly. "I thought I told you." "You didn't tell me anything," she snapped. "And like some sort of errand girl, I had to go pick up your children." Jonathan scowled. "Did you go to Samantha's?" "Yes," she said, raising her voice. "I had to stand there listening to her tell me I'm not welcome in their life because he didn't show up. That little brat had to watch as I was yelled at like a monster." Jonathan held up his hands and whispered, "Calm down, Vivian. They're just kids. They don't understand." She jumped to her feet and yelled, "They don't understand because you won't let me be part of their lives." "You let her push me away, Jonathan," she cried. "You're giving her the advantage." "When?" he said, his tone disbelieving. "Vivian, this isn't a game. My sons are involved. And who am I?" Her eyes burned as she hissed. "A mere stand-in? Just someone to keep your bed warm until you're ready to fully commit as a father." "Stop, Vivian," he snapped. "This isn't about you. It's about them." "No, Jonathan," she murmured as she moved closer, her eyes menacing and dark. "It's about us. And if you don't decide soon, you'll lose me permanently." His heart raced as he gazed at her. He cared for Vivian. He really did. But the boys were his biological children. They were caught in the middle of an unjust fight. "I can't leave them," he replied quietly. "Not again." Anger twisted Vivian's face. The sound of her glass shattering against the wall reverberated through the empty penthouse. "Fine," she spat. But when she steals everything, don't come crying to me. Jonathan was left standing in the dark as she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Months passed during the custody dispute, gradually wearing Samantha down. Each time she entered that courtroom, she braced herself for another attack. Vivian's attorney worked tirelessly to paint her as an unsuitable mother. Samantha, however, refused to be intimidated or bullied, no matter how hard they tried. Jonathan attempted to mediate between his deteriorating relationship with Vivian and his love for his sons. He often reassured Samantha that he wanted the best for the boys, but his actions, missing important milestones and showing up late for visits, spoke louder than words. Then everything changed one day. On a bright afternoon, Samantha's lawyer called her unexpectedly. Vivian, not Jonathan, had requested full custody. She was arguing that the boys would be better off living with her and Jonathan because Samantha was mentally unstable. Samantha was stunned by its audacity. "That's not possible, is it?" Samantha gripped the phone and murmured. "Even their mother isn't her." "No, but she's trying to sway the judge by leveraging her wealth and power." Her attorney gave a somber response. "We must be ready for anything." The subsequent hearing was a haze. Samantha listened in disbelief as Vivian's attorney presented their case, twisting every aspect of Samantha's life into something unsavory and hazardous. They argued that Samantha was poisoning the boys against their father and his new fiancée by refusing to allow Vivian to be part of their lives. Samantha's eyes darted to Jonathan as she listened, her heart thumping. His eyes were glued to the ground, and he appeared uneasy. None of it sat well with him. She knew that much, but he remained silent. He didn't stand up for her. He simply sat there while Vivian tore her apart. At that moment, Samantha reached a realization. Jonathan would never change. He lacked the courage to act honorably, too afraid of losing Vivian. If it meant preserving his relationship with her, he would let her destroy Samantha. But Samantha was strong, and she wouldn't let them take her sons away. When it was her turn to speak, Samantha stood firm and addressed the court clearly and steadily. Before bedtime, she talked about the boys, about their personalities, their dreams, and how they always laughed together. She recounted the life she had built for them on her own, the sacrifices she had made, and the love and care she had given them. She looked straight at Jonathan and said quietly, "I'm not perfect, but I will fight until the day I die because I love my kids more than anything else." The room fell silent. After observing her for several moments, the judge turned to Jonathan. "Do you agree with your fiancé's request for sole custody, Mr. Carter?" she asked sharply. Jonathan's eyes widened as his head snapped up. "What?" he stammered. "Do you think your fiancé should have more control over your children than their mother?" The judge repeated sternly. Jonathan glanced between Samantha, who stood tall and unwavering, and Vivian, who glared daggers at him. He slowly shook his head. "No," he muttered. "I don't." Anger twisted Vivian's face. "You can, Jonathan," she snapped. "I apologize, Vivian," he murmured quietly, "but this isn't right." The judge nodded toward Samantha. "Miss Blake, you have my confidence. Your children are fortunate to have a mother so strong and dedicated." The nightmare ended instantly. With her plans dashed, Vivian stormed out of the courthouse that day. Not long after, her engagement to Jonathan dissolved under the weight of animosity and resentment. Without Vivian pushing him, Jonathan stepped back and agreed to a far more modest custody arrangement. Until the boys were ready for extended visits, he supervised their initial weekend stays. Day by day, Samantha began to trust him again, not as a romantic partner, but as a father figure to their sons. The scars ran deep, but over time, the boys started looking forward to spending weekends with him because he tried harder and put more effort. It might take years for the scars to fully heal. Samantha knew this and understood that Jonathan would never truly belong to their family, not the way she and the boys did. But she had won, and that was enough. She had emerged stronger after fighting for herself and her children. One evening, as she tucked the boys into bed, Jack gazed up at her solemnly. "Mommy," he said, "will Daddy come back?" Samantha felt her heart constrict. She brushed a lock of hair off his forehead while kneeling beside his bed. He will always be your father, my love, she whispered gently. But he won't come back to live with us. No. Jack's little brow furrowed as he nodded slowly. It's okay, he said finally, because you're with us. Samantha smiled, her heart swelling with affection. Yes, she murmured. I am, and I always will be. A calmness settled over her as she tiptoed out of the room and switched off the light. The conflict was over. She had moved past the pain and betrayal. Finally, she and her boys were free. Years passed. The boys thrived in the modest yet cozy home Samantha had built for them, growing up happy and healthy. Though he remained more of a guest than a father figure, Jonathan stayed involved in their lives. Even after he remarried, it was clear that he frequently thought about Samantha and the boys. For her part, Samantha moved on. She focused on her family, her work, and the life she had created. She launched her own company, a modest marketing agency that quickly became known for its honesty and originality. She dated a few men, but remained content, knowing none of them could fill the void left by Jonathan. On a sunny afternoon, Samantha watched as Jesse sprinted across the soccer field. Excitement lit up his face. Jake and Jack stood beside her, their voices blending with the thunderous applause of the crowd. Samantha felt happy and whole for the first time in a long while. She had struggled, broken, and rebuilt herself. She had lost but also gained. Ultimately, she discovered something even greater than what she had lost: peace, resilience, and a hopeful future. With a wide grin, Samantha spread her arms as the boys ran toward her, their cheeks flushed with joy. This family and this love were all she had ever needed. Samantha's story is one of strength, perseverance, and the profound love of a mother committed to protecting her children from disappointment and betrayal. Despite a challenging custody battle and eventual triumph, Samantha never wavered in her dedication to her boys or herself. Samantha proved that true strength originates from within and that no amount of wealth or power can replace a mother's love, especially in the face of Jonathan's abandonment and Vivian's relentless attempts to tear her family apart.